I can still hear the sound of their laughter echoing over the roar of the pouring rain. It is a sound that has been burned into my memory, branded onto my very soul for the last 5 years. I stood on the front porch of my childhood home, soaking wet, gripping the cracked plastic handle of a single, battered suitcase that held everything I owned in the world. The cold rain was stinging my face, running down my collar, but I couldn't tear my eyes away from the large bay window. Through the glass, perfectly illuminated by the warm, amber glow of the living room lamps, I could see my mother, my father, and my younger sister, Chloe. They were standing in a circle, holding delicate crystal glasses. I watched as they literally clinked their champagne flutes together in a celebratory toast. My father pointed at me through the rain-streaked glass, said something to Chloe, and the three of them erupted into a fit of hysterical, open-mouthed laughter. I was their blood. I was their son and their brother. I had just been made entirely homeless, thrown out into a violent thunderstorm with nowhere to go, and they found it absolutely hilarious. They thought they had finally broken me. They thought I was walking away to disappear into a life of miserable, groveling poverty. But as I turned my back on that house, walked down the driveway, and stepped into the storm, I wasn't crying. I was smiling. Because what they didn't know, what they were too ignorant and arrogant to realize, was that the single folded piece of heavy paper tucked safely inside my waterproof jacket pocket was about to become the foundation of an absolute empire. And 5 years later, when they were the ones standing in the metaphorical rain begging for my help, nobody would be laughing. To understand how my own flesh and blood could pop champagne to celebrate my homelessness, you have to understand the deeply sick, twisted dynamic I was raised in. In our house, Chloe was the sun, the moon, and the stars. I was just the dirt she walked on. It was never a secret. It was a policy that was enforced brutally and daily. When Chloe turned 16, my parents took out a second mortgage on our house to buy her a brand new, cherry red convertible because she claimed taking the bus was damaging her mental health. When I turned 16 a few years prior, my father had handed me a pair of heavy, blister-inducing work gloves and told me to get a job at the local lumber yard if I wanted to eat anything other than generic rice and beans. I was the family workhorse. I fixed the leaky pipes in the basement. I mowed the sprawling lawn in the blistering heat. I worked double shifts hauling timber just to pay for my own thrift store clothes, and I studied until my eyes bled. I was naturally analytical, quietly brilliant, and completely underestimated by the people who should have championed me. While Chloe was failing basic high school math, skipping classes, and spending her days taking selfies in her convertible, I was sitting in the back corner of the public library. I read everything I could get my hands on. I devoured textbooks on urban development, zoning laws, commercial real estate investing, and financial market trends. My parents thought I was a dull, unambitious drudge. They would constantly host dinner parties and tell their friends that Chloe was destined to be a star, a CEO, or a celebrity influencer, while I was just going to be a blue-collar nobody. They made sure I heard them say it. The real nightmare, the true inciting incident that tore the fabric of our family apart, started when my grandfather passed away. Grandpa Arthur was the only person in the family who ever saw me for who I really was. He used to sit with me on the porch, smoke his pipe, and ask me complex questions about the economic theory books I was reading. When he died, it shattered my heart. But the reading of his will shattered my family's facade completely. We all sat in the stuffy, wood-paneled office of Grandpa's lawyer. The divide was incredibly clear. To Chloe, my grandfather left $50,000 in cold, hard cash. To my parents, he left his beautiful, sprawling, fully paid-off farmhouse on the good side of town. And to me, he left a 30-acre plot of completely barren, rocky, seemingly useless land on the absolute rural outskirts of the county. My family actually laughed out loud in the lawyer's office. Chloe literally snorted, holding her massive check to her chest, and openly mocked me for inheriting a dirt farm. My father shook his head and muttered that it was a fitting inheritance for someone who was going nowhere, but I didn't laugh. Grandpa Arthur wasn't stupid, and I had been meticulously tracking the county zoning commission meetings and public infrastructure proposals for the past 2 years. I knew exactly what that land was worth, even if nobody else in the room did. Almost immediately after the funeral, the greed set in like a rot. "Chloe, completely lacking any financial literacy, blew through her $50,000 in less than 6 months. She bought designer bags she didn't need, went on a lavish month-long trip to Europe to find herself, and invested the rest of the money in a completely fraudulent, doomed-to-fail influencer marketing startup that vanished overnight. She was broke, she was in debt, and she was furious. So she started eyeing my dirt farm. She did some digging and found a buyer, a local industrial farmer who wanted the land for a dumping ground and offered her $20,000 for it. Suddenly, my parents were cornering me every single day. My mother would barge into my room while I was trying to study and demand I sign the deed over to Chloe. "She needs the money to restart her business, Mark," my mother would say, crossing her arms, her eyes hard and cold. "You don't even use that land. It's just sitting there growing weeds. You owe it to your sister. She has actual potential. You're just being selfish and hoarding it to spite her." When I calmly refused, explaining that it was my inheritance from Grandpa, the punishments began. My father changed the Wi-Fi password so I couldn't access the internet for my research. They took the groceries I bought with my own hard-earned money out of the fridge and literally threw them in the outdoor trash cans. They stopped washing my clothes. They made my life a living hell, a daily psychological war of attrition, trying to break my spirit so I would hand over the only asset I owned. The climax of their cruelty, the major betrayal that I will never forgive, happened on a miserable Tuesday night. I came home from a grueling 12-hour shift at the lumberyard. I was exhausted, my muscles ached, I was covered in sawdust, and I just wanted to sleep. I walked into the kitchen, and my blood ran ice cold. My parents were sitting at the dining room table with Chloe. Sitting next to my father was a man in a cheap suit with a briefcase, a local notary public. There was a thick stack of legal papers resting in the center of the table, alongside a pen. My father stood up, his face twisted in a fake, sickeningly sweet smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Mark, sit down," he commanded. "We've decided to make things very easy for you. We drafted a contract." "What is this?" I asked, keeping my distance from the table. "It's a transfer of deed," my mother said flatly. "You sign the land over to Chloe tonight, and in exchange, we will allow you to continue living in this house for another 6 months, rent-free. We think that's more than generous." "If you don't sign it right now," my father interrupted, his voice dropping to a menacing growl, "you are no longer our son. You are a trespasser, and you can pack your bags and get out of my house." I stared at them, the absolute betrayal washing over me like a tidal wave. They had actually brought a stranger, a legal official, into our home to ambush me. They were trying to strong-arm me, to extort me into giving up my inheritance to fund my sister's vanity. "I'm not signing it," I said, my voice remarkably steady despite the adrenaline pounding in my ears. "Grandpa left it to me. Not you, not her." Chloe burst into theatrical screaming tears. "You are ruining my life!" she shrieked, slamming her fists on the table. "I need that money. You're just a jealous loser." My father's face turned violently purple. He lunged forward, grabbed me by the collar of my dirty work shirt, and physically shoved me backward toward the hallway. "Then get out!" he roared, spit flying from his lips. "You are worthless! You have always been worthless! Take your junk and get out of my house right now!" I didn't fight back. I didn't yell. I walked to my small bedroom, packed my few changes of clothes and my books into a single suitcase, and walked out the front door. That was when the rain started coming down in sheets. That was when I looked back through the window and saw them clinking their glasses, laughing, celebrating my supposed demise. But here is the unexpected twist they never saw coming. What they didn't know, what nobody knew except me, Grandpa Arthur, and a select few state politicians, was that a massive, multi-billion-dollar interstate highway expansion had been quietly approved by the state legislature, and the only viable path for the new primary commercial exit ramp went right through the dead center of my 30-acre dirt farm. I lived in the back seat of my rusty, beat-up sedan for a month. I showered at a cheap 24-hour gym. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for every meal, but I held on to that deed like it was my own beating heart. 2 months after my family kicked me out, the state developers contacted me with an initial buyout offer. They offered me $300,000. I laughed in their faces and declined. I didn't sell. I leveraged. I used the land as collateral to secure a massive commercial loan from a private investment bank. I took that money and partnered with a national commercial real estate development firm. I didn't just let them build an exit ramp. I maintained ownership of the surrounding acreage and developed a massive, sprawling commercial travel plaza, a luxury hotel, and a high-end retail complex. I oversaw every single detail, using everything I had learned in those library books. I outnegotiated men twice my age. Fast forward 5 years. I was 27 years old, and I was the founder and CEO of an incredibly lucrative commercial real estate holding firm. I wore custom-tailored suits, drove a luxury vehicle that cost more than my parents' entire house, and lived in a sprawling modern estate overlooking the city skyline. While I was quietly building a multi-million-dollar empire in the city, my family was rapidly drowning in the suburbs. Chloe's constant, insatiable need for luxury and validation had bled my parents entirely dry. They had taken out a second mortgage on the beautiful farmhouse Grandpa left them to fund another one of her failed business ventures. Then they took out a third mortgage to pay off her credit card debts. Eventually, the math caught up with them. The bank foreclosed on the farmhouse. They lost everything. They were broke, desperate, and forced to move into a cramped, depressing rental apartment on the bad side of town. They were so desperate that they managed to score pity invites to the annual City Commerce Charity Gala, an exclusive black tie event for the county's elite. They were hoping to network, to rub elbows, and to beg for a loan or a high-paying job from some of the wealthy attendees. What they absolutely did not know was that I was the primary financial sponsor of the event. I walked into the grand ballroom that night surrounded by a small entourage of city officials, investors, and business leaders. The room was dripping in elegance, filled with the soft sounds of a string quartet and the clinking of crystal. I saw them almost immediately. Chloe was wearing an outdated, ill-fitting dress, looking frantic and exhausted as she scanned the room. My mother looked frail and deeply stressed. My father looked 10 years older, his shoulders slumped, completely beaten down by life. When my father's eyes lazily drifted across the room and locked onto me, his jaw literally dropped. He froze. He nudged my mother, pointing a trembling finger in my direction. The three of them stared at me like they were looking at a ghost. I was standing near a towering champagne fountain, casually discussing zoning permits with the city mayor, when my family timidly approached me. They looked like terrified mice approaching a lion. "Mark?" my mother whispered, her voice cracking. Her eyes darted wildly, taking in the perfection of my tailored suit, the incredibly expensive watch glinting on my wrist, and the fact that the mayor of the city was standing deferentially beside me. Is that really you? I took a slow, deliberate sip of my drink, my face an unreadable mask of calm. "Hello, Mother." Chloe aggressively pushed her way to the front, pushing our mother aside. Her eyes were wide with a sickening, greedy realization. "Mark! Oh my God, Mark! I heard the owner of the new highway complex was going to be here tonight. That's you? You own all of that? The hotel, the plaza, everything?" I nodded, my voice perfectly level. "I do. That dirt farm turned out to be quite the investment." My father stepped forward, forcing a pathetic, trembling, sycophantic smile onto his face. It was the most disgusting thing I had ever seen. "Son," he breathed out, we have missed you so much. We've had a really hard time lately. The bank took the farm. We're struggling. We always knew you were going to be a massive success. We were just applying tough love back then. We wanted to push you to greatness. We are so proud of you. Listen, we need a place to stay, and Chloe needs a job at your company, an executive position. We're family, Mark. We need you." The absolute, unmitigated audacity of his words was breathtaking. I looked at the three of them, these people who had tormented me, starved me, assaulted me, and discarded me like garbage. And then I raised my voice. Not to a yell, but just loud enough so that the surrounding crowd of elite businessmen, powerful investors, and local politicians could hear me perfectly. "Family?" I asked, my voice dripping with absolute ice, cutting through the ambient noise of the ballroom. That's a fascinating word for you to use. My father's smile faltered. Mark, lower your voice. Where was this family when you tried to extort my grandfather's inheritance from me? I continued, stepping closer to them, forcing them to shrink back. Where was this family when my father physically assaulted me and threw me into a violent thunderstorm because I refused to fund Chloe's delusions? Where was this family when you stood in the window of your warm house, clinking champagne glasses and laughing at me as I walked away homeless with one suitcase?